Hey there. Today on our show, I am pleased to introduce you to my dear friend, Mindy Taylor. She and I are going to talk about what it means to be a maker, how you identify as a maker when you're in a period or a season of your life where you're not really making things, the influence that our ancestors have on our making, and a story about belonging. One that, while may not mimic your own experience in life, I'll bet you can relate to. Mindy gets really vulnerable in sharing her lineage, her heritage, and how she felt like an imposter, and the event that started to shift that for her. She also shares about her love of writing and her love of storytelling. I also talked her into sharing a really special story with us. So Mindy recently started doing story slams at different events, and I asked her if she would share with us one of those stories here on the podcast. So look for that to come later on. And in that story, she shares how she didn't always feel like she belonged and what that looks like and how that started to shift. We can all relate, I think, to feeling like an imposter and feeling like we're not enough and that we don't belong. And truly, there's nothing quite like feeling like you do belong and understanding that that power to belong or not belong is within each of us individually. But we give a lot of power outside of ourselves to determine our worthiness. And so Mindy gets vulnerable and shares that story with us, and I'm so glad she did. All right, without further ado, you're listening to the In Kitchen Podcast, a podcast for makers. Makers who crave an authentic, vibrant life on their own terms. Let's get started. This episode is sponsored by Brooks Ann Camper and her prep school for custom sewing. Custom sewing to create high-quality custom fit garments for yourself by yourself from start to finish, without the uses of sizes or commercial sewing patterns. She's designed the process she teaches specifically for people who want to make their own clothes, and they want them to fit, and they want to have fun while making them. You can find Brooks Ann at brooksann.com. That's BROOKSANN.com. I'm here today with my very good friend, Mindy Taylor. Mindy, welcome.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here.
I asked Mindy to be on this podcast because, honestly, she's one of the wisest women I know. And I wanted to share her with all of you that are listening. And also because I knew that she'd be vulnerable with me, which, if you know me at all, you know, like, something that I like to do. I like to go deep, and I like to go in that vulnerability because I think that we can all resonate when somebody's vulnerable or speaking their truth. We can resonate with that, and it touches us all. Like, whether our story is the same or not, like, there's some human connection that happens that way. And I knew that Mindy would do that with me. And I'm just really grateful for you to do that and to be here. And thanks in advance for bearing your soul.
Well, you know that I don't really have a choice because it is who I am. And I'm honored to be here. So
excellent. Well, this podcast is about makers living vibrantly and on their own terms, right? And it's living vibrantly and on your own terms can be from any perspective whatsoever. I'm just using the lens of a maker because, one, it's something that I am. And two, I think that we have a unique perspective of that kind of do-it-yourselfness. And I think that possibly makers, I don't know that it's more than other people, but I'm actually just working through this idea in my head right now, actually, might be more drawn to the idea that we can change our own lives because we feel like we can make things that we want in our lives, right? So, like, I think it goes hand in hand. So that's where I want to go with this podcast. So, having said that, do I identify as a maker?
ultimately I do. I think there's times that I vary in how I see myself and like what qualifications per se I have. But yes, I do identify as a maker.
What do you think causes you in your life to question whether you're a maker? As you just said, you're not sure that you qualify sometimes. Do you have any idea what like kind of kicks you out of the maker club in your own mind?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. When I'm not connected to, that really authentic part of myself and I'm just kind of going through life at just life speed, I'm not doing the things. And I think, honestly, I'm somebody that can put myself in and out of things quite easily, whereas if I were to answer that from a really connected to myself or authentic place, I would say that yes, I'm always a maker. I always have been a maker and I always will be. However, based on where my life ebbs and flows and how connected to what I think of as the flow or source of life, I feel more of a disconnect, and that might be a more fair way to describe it.
That makes a ton of sense. I can definitely, when you're going to laugh about this because you know me well, but when life gets hard or when life all of a sudden opens up, I'm like, this is it forever. This is exactly what's going to happen. Or like, this is awful forever. I'm obviously dying right now. I can understand when you can't feel it and you don't have that groundedness or connection to it. It can feel like you no longer belong.
And I experienced that as a person, kind of like, it's like, oh, yeah, that was me. Huh. It's almost I very, very fully embody something.
Yeah.
And then I move on to something else. And that I think I assimilate it. It stays with who I am. And yet I no longer maintain that specific identity, and it shifts on to the next thing. And so I think that also plays a role because, thinking in terms of being a maker, there's be a lot of different things throughout my life that would qualify as that. And yet not all of them would resonate with the person that's sitting here today.
Yeah, I can hear that. What ways have you been a maker?
Even just thinking of being a little kid, like I was just a prolific creator of things. My dad's entire bedroom was lined like all the way around the room and then around again with all of my pictures and drawings and everything. And people would come over and like my dad would hook up the little, I don't know, we had like one of those record players that had like the stereo with it, and like he'd put in a little like auxiliary mic and I would sing for people. And so like I've always just loved to be able to create, whether it was a song or a piece of art or concoctions with my dog out in the driveway, because I
do not know what that means. Concoctions with your dog.
I would take the spice rack. Like I had my own spice rack, and I would go out and I would make concoctions for my dog outside in the driveway. I don't know if the poor guy ate them or not, but I wasn't an only child, but my sister is 12 years younger than me. So for 12 years, I was an only child. So it was me and my dog, or me and my goose and ducks.
Right. And you didn't make concoctions for the goose and ducks.
Not that I'm aware of.
They probably bite you.
Yeah. Yes. The dog was much more docile. My grandma and aunts definitely are makers.
What did they make?
So my grandma, well, she made a lot of different things, but she was a quilt maker. Mm-hmm. So in fact, on her gravestone, there's a picture of what looks like her with a quilt over her lap, and it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And that was what she spent her whole life. Now, my grandma was from the Bliss Missionary Church, and so they made quilts and rugs and had all kinds of things that they made to raise money for mission work. And as a child, I learned that sense of like giving and making put together in one place. Now, as an adult, I have different thoughts on some of the mission work and how that goes, but that instilled something in me. My grandpa had a heart attack, and he died when he was 57 and left my grandma a widow. And she would sometimes take care of like elderly gentlemen in the area. Like she had this little, it's called Spar's Shack at my grandma's house. And Spar must have been someone that she took care of, not when I was there. So she would take care of them. She lived off my grandpa's Social Security, and like I very much remember eating government beef and government cheese. But she would always just make it work. And so she just took everything that she had and she made it into something, though. Yeah. That was just the way that she did things. And so rag rugs were a huge part of our life. Like we were all, and even out of like bread bags.
Right.
So she would make something out of everything.
Yeah.
And so I definitely got my love of making things, and then food and bread and jam. And like between her and my Aunt Becky, who it's my dad's mom and sister, the number of fair blue ribbons that exist in my Aunt Becky's sewing room between her and grandma's is just prolific.
Wow.
So I think that's where I get my love of making things.
Yeah. A few years back, I wrote a blog post about my friend Mindy, who I'm talking to today, and her husband, Brandon, because I was talking about how when I find an Afghan, like a crocheted Afghan, at a thrift store, I can't leave it behind. And so we have this like no Afghan left behind, right? Because somebody put so much love and care into it, and we all understand that. And when I shared this story with Mindy, she talked about that their whole basement is full of thrift store Afghans that they could never in a million years use them all, but they can't leave any at the store because somebody loved them and somebody made them. They had to bring them home. And I just had to share that story because I'm like, I can resonate with that, even though I try to get rid of things.
Right.
And I try to be brutal about it if I can, because otherwise I get overwhelmed. I love the sentiment of that. Like, somebody made this ugly ass Afghan. I have to bring it home.
Right. In all its 80s color glory.
Polyester, acrylic.
Yeah, all the things. I mean, thankfully, though, that has stopped. We no longer bring them. We really don't go to... I go to thrift stores for, like, if I'm in need of something.
Yeah.
But I don't go to them to peruse very often anymore because we just can't.
You can't treasure hunt anymore.
No. We have enough treasure troves at our house.
Right, indeed. I can hear that. So tell me, what as an adult have you been making? So you shared with us your childhood experiences and the concoctions you made for your dog and not your ducks. What do you make as an adult? Like, what is it that you are drawn to creating?
I don't feel like behaving right now. So I'm going to answer middle part of who I probably am most as a maker.
Okay.
And that's as a writer. And that happened as a teenager. That was definitely like how I survived, how I dealt with a life that just wasn't easy to be in at the moment. Mm-hmm. And whether, poetry, essays, that sort of thing, I've always flirted around with playwriting and things like that. But that was really where I learned, like, this is who I am.
Right.
And so that's probably the first true, like, to who I am making that came into my life.
Do you still write?
Yes.
So that was the middle.
That was the middle. I had to put it in there.
It was beautiful. It needed to be there. It's like, isn't it the truth that, like, creation, whatever it is, whether you're creating a rag or a poem, is about expressing yourself and expressing your love, but also like figuring out who you are as a human. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that it's all involved in that. And I've had interviews on this podcast with people who make as a practice, as a way to just bring patience and quietness into their life. And I think all of that relates to that idea of like figuring out who you are and getting into that flow and touching source. What do you make now?
So the things I probably do most now are like wild crafting and making different concoctions. That concoction thread has maintained. I like to harvest. I'm really lucky to have a lot of different medicines on my property, and we harvest a lot of different things. Some of my favorite being Monarda or bee balm, St. John's wort, red clover. I have a nice giant comfrey. I like to make salves and oils and dabble with different things and see what I can come up with. I like to make sure that I can help the people around me with the things that I am finding outside my door.
Yeah. Which ties into directly what you did as a child, right? Like, as you alluded to. Mm-hmm. And also what your grandmother was teaching you by her example on like helping other people.
Yep.
And it made me think of, so I just did this exercise where you're supposed to imagine yourself as a child and imagine yourself playing and like how you played, right? So I'm trying to imagine the things that brought me joy as a child. And for the most part, they were like making a Barbie car out of a high heel sandal, like gluing things to it to make it look like a sports car, things like that. So like making things. Mm-hmm. And also roller skating in the basement to my Goofy Gold record. And I realized that I love to dance to this day. So roller skating was really a form of dance for me then. I didn't know anybody who danced. Like, I didn't know how to dance per se. I mean, I knew how to dance because we all know how to move, but nobody in my life danced. And so I think roller skating was like a manifestation of that. And I was surprised. I just did this exercise yesterday. I was surprised that the things that I really loved, they're pretty consistent with what I love still to this day. And I'm like, that's interesting. I mean, they look different, but they're very similar.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and it does stick with at least truth for me as well.
Is there anything that you make now that you don't share with anyone else?
I mean, outside of botched batches of concoctions
Right.
and other things. Or it's just like, whoa, that did not work.
We're not going to share that with anyone.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely the writing piece. Like a lot of that is, it's for me. I write poetry, I write songs, I write essays, I write thoughts. I write all the things. And very little of it gets shared. I mean, you get some. Yeah. You get a little bit.
Right. Yep.
But very few people see what I write.
Right. Why is that, do you think? You know what I was going to ask you that.
Right. I mean, I think because it's that deepest part of me. Mm-hmm. I can't write if I'm not really being my authentic self. It's how I really connect to that deep part of me. And so, you know, whatever comes out is really, you know, it is my truth. It is, or it's at least like born of that. I mean, not that I can't write from a different perspective or everything, but there's a vulnerability with writing that's like hard for me to share with other people. And then I'll also be honest and say there's some perfectionism wrapped around it too.
Right.
I was really singled out and praised for how I wrote from like 6th grade on. But the poems that I wrote, I remember in one class, like they would put them on these giant poster boards and then they would be hanging up in the classroom. Or like as I got a little bit older, we would be having to do some submissions and creative writing and the kids were submitting to Highlights magazine. And I was asked to submit to the New Yorker, which was a lot more scary. I remember my high school English teacher, she's like, I don't know why this darkness is inside you and what you have in there. She's like, but you have a gift. I hope you pursue this. I hope this is what you do. Right. And so like there was kind of like that buildup of this is who you are. You're very good at this. And then there's that it's born of this very raw part of who I am. Right. And so it's all kind of wrapped up in that sort of nest.
Do you think that the praise you got early on hindered you? Do you think it like stymied or gave you a deeper sense of like, I've got to do this really well all the time because I'm good at it, so I have to be good at it?
It's interesting. I mean, the people that did support me around writing were some really important people in my life when I didn't have all the support that I needed. And so I think of it overall as positive. I think that there's the possibility that set that piece in motion, that it had to be that way. I think it both probably helped and then put a little bit of pressure on like, this is who you are. You got to perform this way.
Right. You have to be this good or don't bother sharing it.
Yep.
Possibly.
And unfortunately, I am someone that can struggle with, if I'm not just good at it, I may not do it.
Right.
And as we were actually talking about earlier, I started my 44th trip around the sun yesterday, and I'm adopting something from you of picking a word for the year. Mm-hmm. And that word for me is practice, which gives me a little bit of grace in what I'm doing and also as an action. So I move forward in some areas. Yeah. And I think I need to, at this phase of life, really learn that the joy is in the practice. Right. You know, the magic is in the practice. Mm-hmm. And that's probably where my best work is going to come out of. Right. Rather than thinking like, who's going to love this, or this has to be a particular way, or who am I ever going to present this to, you know. And I have had that really personal relationship with writing most of my life. And so when I'm in it, I can do that. But when I'm thinking about it, you know, I'm not the greatest when something's an intellectual concept in my head, because then that perfectionism piece comes in and it can just flat out stop me from ever trying.
Today's episode is sponsored by Brooksand Camper. And I have to tell you, I love Brooksand. She and I teach sewing from a different perspective. And it's really fun to see the differences that we bring to the art of sewing your own clothing. We both have this desire for you to sew clothing that fit your individual body and for you to have so much joy doing that. And she is a delight to be around. She has several different courses online, beginning with Skirt Skills, which is her custom sewing e-course. And you'll learn start to finish the process of creating custom garments that you'll be proud to wear. And by saying start to finish, that means before you even have an idea of what you want to make, through designing, drafting your own pattern, and you go all the way to getting compliments from strangers on your creation, including the design, the pattern making, fitting, and sewing. And you can be a complete beginner. Here's what Sybil had to say about one of Brooke Ann's courses. Brooke Ann's drafting and sewing methods are so different from any other class I've taken. It has really helped me to approach my sewing in a different way. Usually, I sew up a pattern step by step, strictly following the pattern instructions without any understanding of the whole process. Her classes have helped me to have a deeper understanding of garment design and construction and introduce some new techniques that are sure to come in handy. She's offering In Kinship listeners 10% off of her ebook, Figure It Out, a guide to padding a dress form as your body double. You can use the coupon code INKINSHIP, all one word, at brooksann.com, BROOKSANN.com. Check her out. You'll be glad you did. And now, back to our show. When I teach sewing, when somebody tells me that they're a perfectionist, my heart kind of breaks for them because it can be so debilitating. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, I am not a perfectionist, right? But when I'm making something for myself, I can be kind of careless. I can be like, this seems good enough. Whereas I can teach it with precision. We won't say perfection. I can teach it with precision. But I, for my own self, will often be satisfied with a good enough seam. And I'm trying to change that, right? I'm trying to find a different balance with that. And it isn't lost on me that there's probably some emotion tied to the fact that when it's just for me, it can be imperfect. But if it's for somebody else, I'm going to take the extra time to make it. I'm trying not to use the word perfect, but I'm going to make it as best as I can. But if it's just for me, this is good enough, or I'm going to squeeze it in the 5 seconds that I have, so I'm not going to do a good job because I only had 5 seconds to do it, right?
Right.
So I'm trying to shift that in myself, and I think there's that balance between not debilitating yourself with perfectionism and also valuing yourself well enough to do something really well.
Yeah. Listening to you, it was interesting. It's almost like I'm a perfectionist in concept. Because when I'm doing something, I'm pretty haphazard.
Right.
You know, I just go with whatever.
This looks good. That looks good.
Yeah, it doesn't always work out, but so it's more. I think it's like this fear of like how I am perceived or something along that line.
Yeah.
It's more of a concept than a practice because I'm not a perfectionist in what I'm making always, but like how I am thought of, I think is where that might lie. Interesting.
Right. That is interesting. Oh, that might be a whole nother podcast.
Right.
So last year, I don't remember when exactly, but you invited me to go with you and listen to the Moth Radio.
Yes.
Live performance in Traverse City, Michigan. We went to it and it was such a lovely night. And I think it sparked something in your life. And I wonder if you'll tell us that story of what it might have sparked as far as storytelling goes. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to ask you to share a story that you have shared.
Okay. So I'm someone who I've loved storytelling for as long as I can remember. I love the Moth. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've been in the car just crying at the Moth or dying laughing at the Moth. And so, yeah, that evening was just magic. I love to be in a large space with a lot of people enjoying something collectively. It's one of, like, my delights as a human. I let my, like, full personality out, which my laugh can definitely be found in the room most times, whereas most times I'm holding it back. I don't let my full voice out, you know. So that night at the Moth was just magic. But, man, I don't know that to me there is something more powerful than our stories. Mm-hmm. You know, like, and they can't be wrong because they're our stories. Right. They're like what make who we are as people. And, like, when you tell me your story, I'm different. I'm not the same person that I was before I heard that story. And when I tell you mine, it's the same thing. And so I think it's one of the most powerful things that we can do is listen to and share stories with each other. Yeah. And so I love those people that get up on the stage and share what they've experienced. And some are funny and some are tragic. And it changes my life every podcast I listen to of the Moth. And being in person was just a special kind of magic. So it definitely rekindled for me that love of storytelling and reconnecting with an old friend that just has a lot of shared interests around writing and storytelling and whatnot. Between that and going to the Moth, it kind of pushed me a little bit to think about, what do I want to do? And I certainly have had the thought before, and I've hosted a lot of women's circles and healing circles and ceremony and things like that. That's a big part of who I am. That's another way I'm a maker for sure. I create space and I hold it for others. And so that's probably another really intense place for me of making. But I decided that, okay, my sister and brother-in-law have this festival that they have each year, and they're just revamping it a little bit. And so I pitched the idea of having a story slam, which is a Moth-inspired place where people just get up and tell quick stories on the stage. It happened, and it was pretty cool.
So I've asked you to share that story with us today on the podcast. But before we do that, I do want to touch on the magic and the beauty of like having something in your heart that you want to create, you want to do, and having the courage to do it. Because getting up on the stage, creating a whole event around it in front of a lot of people is a big deal. And to do it and have this dream in your heart that you wanted this to happen and decide to yourself, it's not happening around me and I want this to happen, so I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to create it. I'm going to create space for that to happen. And not only did you create space for that event to happen, but you also participated in that event and told your story. I love that. And I think that's exactly what it is to be a maker, right? And I think that's exactly what it is to live a vibrant life, is decide, I want this in my life. And so rather than waiting for some fairy godmother to put it into my life, I'm going to do it. I'm going to bring it into my life. And I think that's what living vibrantly and fully awake and alive is all about. Years ago, I had read the book. This is kind of pivotal to my story as far as taking charge of my life, if you will. I mean, there's only so much we can take charge of, but taking charge of what I can, because I get to take charge of how I experience things. Like, I do get control over that for the most part, especially as I continue to evolve and grow and learn, right? Every day I get to learn better ways of taking control of my own experience. But I read a book called, you probably know this because it was made into a movie, Julie and Julia by Julie Powell. And it was at a time when I remember sitting on my couch and thinking, is this all there is to my life? My life is less lackluster and boring, and can this truly be how I'm going to spend the rest of my life? And it was in my late 20s. And I read this book, and so this woman had a similar, if I remember correctly, she had a similar experience of life was lackluster and boring. She decided just to give herself some arbitrary challenge. She was going to do every recipe in Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking cookbook. There's nothing that's connected to that, right? That's not going to get her anywhere. It's not going to do anything for her. She just decided to give herself something that felt passionate and exciting, and it changed her life.
Yeah.
And I just think we have so much more control over our lives than we think we do. We have so much more ability to enhance our lives than we understand. And it doesn't take giant changes. It takes a little bit here and a little bit there, and committing to a practice, because that was a practice for her, right? She had committed to it. So she rather crazily decided that she was going to make it happen in that year, come hell or high water. And I don't know that I advocate for that exactly, but there's something about committing to yourself.
Yeah.
That I really appreciate. So that reminds me of that. And I just think I don't know, it just gives me all the zings. I want to honor that you did that. And I want to thank you for sharing your story that you're about to share.
Well, thanks. But before I do, I will just say I have a fair amount of fear as a human. Most things intimidate me. I have low-grade anxiety most of the time and high-grade when something triggers it. So if I actually listen to those things, and I have a lot of the who do you think you are? Yeah. And that sort of thing, which we'll hear about that a little bit in my story. Yeah. But I don't let that stop me from doing things. And so when I want something to exist, because, that women's circle I alluded to, which thank you for this conversation, because it really helped me realize, I'm that's probably the most authentic way that I am a maker, is creating space. And the things that I do within ceremony and ritual there. But it's not by any means the only, but it's probably between that and writing, which they go together. That's probably the most authentic. So I appreciate the space to explore that. But it's not like, oh yeah, these things are easy for me to do, so I'm going to do it. They scare the shit out of me. And I do that to myself quite often. Like, I do not let myself sit in a comfort zone. And I don't think it's in a bad way. I think it's in a way that's just like, it pushes me out there, and then I'm like, why? And then thank you, Brene Brown, for giving the word vulnerability hangover, or the phrase, to me, because I have one of those most of the time, because I have no other choice as a human but to be really vulnerable. And so I do these sorts of things. And like you said, when something doesn't exist in the world and I want it to, it doesn't stop me from saying, well, maybe somebody will do that. It's like, well, I guess we need a story slam.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Just had to say that.
I can hear that. Are you ready to share your story with us?
So this past spring, I found myself boarding a ferry that had taken me all of my 43 years to get to. And the reason it had taken that long is because I really didn't believe that I belonged there. And I'm one of those people. Like, if I don't think that my keys are on the table, I will not see them, even if they're right there. And it was a little bit like that for me in this ferry. And before we can even go back to talking about that ferry, we have to go back to a little girl that just knew a tiny bit about what she was and very little about who she was. So both of my parents are citizens of tribal nations. I'm a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians through my dad, and I am a descendant of the Little Traverse Bay bands of Odawa Indians through my mom. So what does that mean? Well, it means that I am both Ojibwe and Odawa. It means that I am Indigenous. And it means that some of my relatives and my ancestors have been here in this very spot for a very, very long time. But growing up, I really didn't know any of that. The thing I remember most about being part Native is that we would go up across the bridge for healthcare. We would go to the health clinic. I would go to St. Ignace, Kenross, Kinsella, Sault Ste. Marie, and so we'd go over the bridge for healthcare. I learned the same thing that most of the other kids in the area learned about Native Americans and Indians, right? I learned that in 1492, Columbus sailed that ocean blue, and I remember the celebration of pilgrims and Indians and Thanksgiving. You know, I learned about ceremony through the Christian church. We did not attend powwows or ghost suppers. I did not attend Title VI when I was in school. And I really, for me, medicine was Tylenol and Verner's, and plants were either food or weeds. And so I just ended up with a very colonized view of what it was to be a Native American. And I remember just out of high school, and I was applying for a scholarship through the Sioux Tribe. And I remember talking about how I wanted to get this degree, and I wanted to come back, and I wanted to work for my tribal community and make a difference. And I remember how false I felt writing that, that I had a tribal community, that I was a part of anything. And so I did write it, and I applied for it, and I received it, but I never felt quite right about it. And, somewhere along the way, I did hear about our names, about our spirit names, our Indian names. But again, it was one of those things like, oh, I don't deserve that. I don't, that doesn't belong to me. And, belonging is a really big part of this for me. I don't look particularly Native, and that makes a lot of sense because I'm a lot more white than I am Native American. And yet this is a real part of my ancestry as well. And so as I've spent this time searching for that belonging, it hasn't been a straightforward or linear process. I went up to Lake Superior State University in my mid-20s, and I had a job at the Native American Center where I did PR there. And so I wrote for the tribal paper, and I really spent most of my time at the Native American Center. do my homework there and just hang out between classes. That was kind of my first time existing within that particular tribal community. Now, I only ended up there a semester because I ended up switching my area of focus with school, but that was like my first little foray and belonging somewhere within this community. As time went on, there wasn't one thing that led me to that ferry. It was just a whole little culmination of things throughout life. But as I got closer to being there, I can definitely pinpoint that the pandemic was something that just shifted things in me in the way that it did for so many of us, where I looked at the job that I had been at for 13 years and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. It was a great job. I had done really good work there, and it was time to find something different. And so kind of as I was going through the pandemic, I was thinking about, that shift and change. And then I remember one day I came across on social media a video, and it was made by a local Anishinaabe, and it was about, this is what Anishinaabe are. Anishinaabe are Anishinaabe women. And this video was full of people that looked like me. And something inside me broke and healed at the same time, and there was a lot of tears. And around the same time, too, another citizen of the Sioux tribe wrote a book, The Firekeeper's Daughter, and her main character, Donis, really struggled with belonging, and it had a lot, I don't know, there's a lot of her in me, this way I can put it. And so I know that all started to just kind of shift everything together. And so as time went on and I saw the opening for a position at the Little Traverse Bay Band's health clinic, I actually went for it. I had enough, at least courage, if not belonging, to say, you know what, I'm going to step up here. I think there's work I can do, to help serve my tribal community. And so I applied for the job, and the interview went really well, and it's actually where I'm at today. That was that little journey of belonging. And so, but just before that, in 2021, so it was in that whole pandemic era, I learned about this fast for Mother Earth, which was taking place at the culture camp on Sugar Island, which is just outside of Sioux, Michigan. And it was a one-day fast, and then there'd be a sweat lodge, and I was like, I want to go to that. And so, I had called and arranged, and I was going to go, and I said, bring my sister-in-law. And, this was early enough in the pandemic where it just, even though, like, retrospectively, the numbers, in the area were probably much lower than they are just in general today, it just ended up feeling really irresponsible to go, like, sleep in communal lodging, be in a sweat lodge with others. And so I ended up not doing it. And I think it also had a lot to do with belonging still. But I put that off for another day. And then I got notification that the same event was happening in 2022. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it this year. Absolutely. And it just so happened that a conference at work put me at Bay Mills, which is about 20 minutes from that ferry, that Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then the Friday was a half-day conference and would give me time to go exactly where I needed to go. And I was like, this is perfect. And then the who do you think you are gremlins came in, and because, I don't just have them about belonging, I also have them about being a mother, because my son, he would already not have me on Wednesday, Thursday. If I came home Friday, I could be there in time to pick him up, after school. And so I didn't even call to see if there was a spot. Like, yes, it's really nice, but it's not going to work out this year. We'll try it another time. And so I had just gone out about my business. And then I don't know what exactly. I came out of physical therapy one day. I was having some work on my knees done. And I just got in the van and I called traditional medicine. And I just said, are there any seats left for coming up for the fast that's taking place on Sugar Island? And she's just like, oddly enough, I just hung up the phone. Someone canceled. There's one bed left. It's a couch, but you can have it if you want it. And I said, I want it. I said, by any chance that the traditional healer is going to be there, could I arrange having my naming ceremony as well? And she said, absolutely. I will let them know that you're interested. And so I signed up for that. And it didn't leave me very many days to pack and get ready for being gone that whole week. But I pulled it all together and I went to the conference. And I would love to tell you that I just, that conference is on Friday and I ran up to that ferry Friday afternoon full of confidence and glee. And that is not the case. I had to call my closest friends, call them, message with them, because I couldn't really leave the parking lot in Bay Mills because those gremlins of "you don't belong" were really loud. But I think it's because they knew their time was really short. And so my friends bolstered me up and I made my way to the ferry and got on there, went across, and I did. I met my ancestors on the other side. And I would love to tell you the stories of there, that's for another time. But what it can tell you is I went there and I met myself. And I would like to introduce you to her. Ani Buju, Gitagwa Manido and Dijnaka, Odawa, Minwa, Ojibwe and Dao, Bliss and Dojnaba, Makwa and Dodum. Chimagwech. Hi, my name is Planting Spirit. I am Odawa and Ojibwe. I am from Bliss, and I am Bear Clan. Thank you very much.
My story.
Mindy, give me shivers.
I forget how hard every time it is to get to the end of that. It still has a lot of things wrapped around it for me.
Right.
And that was when I told it on the stage, I cried. And when I looked out at the people listening, they were crying. Mm-hmm. But that's why we tell our stories.
Right.
So we can connect. So we understand that other people struggle with some of the same things that we do. Mm-hmm. And other people face their fears.
Yes.
So thanks for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you for the vulnerability in sharing it. And for allowing us to connect. And I wonder, speaking of connection and other people, I wonder what you wish in your heart that women in the world knew about themselves.
Yeah. I wish that everybody knew this, but I think as women, we absorb a lot of the world around us and we care for a lot of people. Not to say, that our brothers don't.
Very true.
But I wish that every woman knew that who you are is your gift. We spend so much time trying to be something that we're not or measure up to something when the only thing the world needs from us is to be who we are. And man, this is something I am trying to, birth for myself, because I really think I need to be this weird, pristine version of myself. And that is not what I love as people. My people are weird. And
Wait a minute.
I'm sorry. But we are not cookie cutter people. And I don't, I think cookie cutter people have severed off a lot of that authenticity.
Yeah.
Because everybody's got their own brand of weird. Mm-hmm. And I love people that show it the most.
Yeah.
And that's what we need. We need everyone's brand of weird. We need everyone's authentic piece. And so I'll imagine a world where every one of us knew that the only thing that we needed to do well was be us.
Wow.
That's something I've really been thinking about a lot this year.
Yeah.
And to just do it. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is. I think, I had the opportunity to sit with my niece this weekend, and she is 12. And you were talking about a dance. Well, it turns out like her moms needed her not to go to the dance for other reason. I'm like, honey, you got to do the things. And they're like, no, on the things. We have other things to do. I'm like, yeah, but don't let the reason that you don't go to the dance because you're afraid.
Right.
So that would be what I would say, especially to the younger people listening, or to the mothers needing, wanting to foster something within their children, is like, encourage them to do the things. Do the things. Because, there's so many little corners to hide in, and I don't want to hide in them. And I don't want to see other people, because, like I said, I think the world needs us. It needs us to show up.
I agree. Thanks for showing up here today.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
I appreciate you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's always a treat to spend time with you. And it's not even too weird to do it with a microphone.
No, not so different.
No.
Really?
No.
Mindy would like to dedicate today's episode to Dan Bonnet, who reminded her that she has stories to tell. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for listening. I'm really grateful you're here. Would you do me a favor? Would you subscribe on your favorite podcasting app? And while you're at it, leave a review for the show. Reviews are the best way that I can reach new people. And I want to talk to new people. I want to interview new makers, people I've never met, whose stories I want to share with you. All right, have the most wonderful day. This episode was sponsored by Brooks Ann Camper and her prep school for custom sewing. What if sewing your own clothes meant never referencing a size chart? What if fitting your own body didn't involve comparisons to standards or anybody else's body? What if the whole process of sewing for yourself was designed specifically for your body and your personal preferences? In Brooks Ann Prep School for Custom Sewing, she'll show you how. She'll show you that if you don't love the way something is made, there are probably a multitude of other ways you can make it. She'll show you how it makes no sense, really, to start with somebody else's measurements when you can just begin with your own. She makes it personable and fun. And she's offering my listeners, that's you, 10% off of her ebook called Figure It Out, a guide to padding a dress form as your own body double. I added the own. You can use the coupon code INKINSHIP, all one word, when you check out. You'll find Brooks Ann online at brooksann.com, BROOKSANN.com. Look her up and get on her mailing list. Because not only does Brooks Ann have comprehensive, beautiful e-courses, she also does couture sewing, and she shares about her process on her blog. It's a delight to read.